everybody. Nice to see you all. I see lots of familiar faces. I see a couple new faces. If you don't know me, my name is Rachel Jones. I'm the president of Hamilton Naturalist Club, and I'm happy to be your host this evening for another monthly meeting. Thank you for coming in this dreary February day to talk about the bees of Hamilton. I'm really excited about this one. We have Dr. Susan Dudley here with us today from McMaster University, and it's going to be a great presentation tonight. But as usual, we're going to start the night with a few updates from the club, so bear with me, and I'll let you know what's been going on. So announcements, first of all, how many of you saw our urgent call to action the other day before City Council with the vote? So if you're not, okay, great to see some hands. So it got out there. I wanted to say on behalf of the club and myself, thank you so much to everybody who shared anything, who wrote to your counselors. Happy to say that the motions were both defeated. So there was two motions that were brought to City Council there's like a new way that they're doing their budget. I don't know all the details, so don't ask me, but I know they were presenting their budget, and there was a risk to the biodiversity action plan that we had passed back in the summer that would take away some of the funding, defer it to next year. And so that was on the table. It was kind of a last minute thing, and we kind of scrambled to get the word out to urge our counselors to reconsider when that vote came up. So thanks to everybody getting their voice out there, we were able to bring enough attention to the matter, and yes, I'm pleased to say that both of those motions were defeated, so great day for the BAP, which is awesome. There's so much momentum. We got to keep that going, so this funding is crucial for that. So the inclusion, the budget remains as requested, so we want 5 full-time staff in Public Works and 1 senior planner. So the work isn't over. It hasn't officially passed yet, the budget, so we're going to wait for that green light before we start jumping up and down, but it's feeling pretty good, and it's great to know that the city agrees that that is still a priority for us, as we all know here tonight. So that's great. If you were here last month, I mentioned that Green Venture was going to be here to do a presentation on Rain Ready Hamilton, new program, and they're still working out some of the details with that, so they're going to defer that to next month's monthly meeting, March 10th. So again, if you came with questions tonight, just bring them again next month, and they'll have a few minutes to kind of share updates on what that is, what it's all about, and how you can get involved or informed. And then finally, too, I have Catherine here. So Dina and Catherine are longtime helpers with refreshments that you come and enjoy every month. So they need help. So I'm going to invite Dina up here to say a few words, and she's going to put her best recruitment hat on and enlist. So come on up, Dina, or Catherine, and thank you again, too, for all the refreshments that you bring for us. We appreciate it. Go ahead, please.
So I've been doing this now for 12 or 14 years, and it's always a great time to talk to people, and I'm usually the first person here, and today we have quite a few new people, and so that's one of the other things that whoever is doing refreshments usually gets to say hello to the new people, which is fun. Dina and I have been alternating bringing juice and cookies, and what we're recognizing is that it would be really good to have another couple of people so that 2 of us can be here every week, or every month, sorry. So if you are wanting to help in that way, I'll be here till the end of the meeting, and I would love to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Catherine. And if you do have questions afterwards, or if you're watching online too, you can send any of us on the board an email, or just info@hamiltonnature.org, and it'll get directed to the right person. Hey.
A word from me.
Oh yeah, please. Nancy, come on up.
She asked me earlier, and then I was hesitating. So here I am. I'm Nancy. I'm the Conservation Education Director. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Just to follow on about the Biodiversity Action Plan and how a lot of you were able to write to council. This is budget season. I work at City Hall, so I'm losing all my hair. Tomorrow, it will be, at noon, will be the last day for anybody to write a letter in support of our cycling infrastructure. Cycling, to me, is a climate move. If you don't have safe bike lanes, I'm a cyclist, thanks to Brian, whose bike I bought, then people are not going to cycle. So if you have a moment tonight or sometime before noon tomorrow, please fire off a quick email. Just, the email is clerk@hamilton.ca. Just say, hey, I support cycling infrastructure, because on Wednesday, there will be likely another motion similar to the one that was designed to kill the BAP, will be coming forward to kill the cycling, expansion of our cycling lanes. So councillors respond when their voters reach out to them. So clerk@hamilton.ca to say that you support cycling. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate that. All right. So more volunteer opportunities. I feel, I say this every month, so we are always looking for writers for the Wood Duck and our e-newsletter too. So if you have any stories that you want to share, we'd love to feature them. So you can contact our Wood Duck editors. We have Carolyn Zanchetta and Helen Powers. And you can email them at woodduck@hamiltonnature.org if you have anything that you want to share. We're always looking for pictures too, so if you've got any pictures that you've taken anywhere in Hamilton that you want to get out there and have it look all nice and pretty in a glossy magazine, then please, we would love to have those. And field events leaders too, we've got Peter here too. So Peter is our field events director, and if you want to lead a hike or a walk or anything around Hamilton, in our nature sanctuaries, the ones that are open, then we'd love to have you too. So if there's any information that you want to share, if you've got a cool little spot that you want to, I know we don't like to give away our secrets all the time, but certain ones, if you want to share with us, then again, we're always looking for hike leaders as well too. So contact Peter for that, or you can speak to him tonight after the meeting is over as well. And then the board of directors. So we are always looking for people to join our board. We have a few vacant positions right now. So grants and fundraising director, again, I mentioned earlier, this is a new one. We haven't posted it yet, but we're going to. And that's just to have a little extra support with our funding, grants and special events. So it's a big task, and there's a lot of people on the board that we're kind of working off the side of our desk on some of these things. So to have extra support in that area to bolster just our fundraising efforts would be really great. So if you know anybody that would be interested in a position like that, that's one of them. Sanctuary director, we have just recently revised our terms of reference for the sanctuary committee. So we're going to be posting that as well. We have a new job description for the role of sanctuary director, and that's going to be decided over the next month. And you can go online. I don't know if it's been posted quite yet, but I know within this week that'll be available for you guys to view and ask more questions and apply. And director at large as well too. So that's another vacant position that we have on our board, just providing general support to the board, strategic oversight. I mentioned last month that this is going to be a big year focused on strategy and the work ahead. As we're seeing with the BAP, that's a 5-year plan, but that's only one thing. We as a club still have lots of work ahead of us if we want to make it another 100 years. So a lot of that is going to be strategic planning. It's not something that we focused on a lot as a club in past years. So kind of gathering that foundation of what the past is, what the goals are, and where we're headed is going to be huge for us in the coming years. And we need your help with that. As members, as most of you are in this room, if you're on the board, if you're volunteering, everybody's voice counts, as we've already heard with City Council too. So everything makes an impact, and we need your advice, your opinions, and your expertise in that. So any help that you're willing to share with us. Charlie Briggs is our volunteer director. You can reach out to him, volunteer@hamiltonnature.org, if you want to learn a little bit more about what those roles are, what they entail, and how you can help. So we'd love to have you. And upcoming events, even though it's winter, we're still doing lots. We've got Fletcher Creek in the winter. Bruce McKenzie is going to be hosting that on Saturday, February 16th. That's this coming Saturday, 1:30 to 3:30. So if you don't have an HCA pass, I believe it is paid parking. If you do have a pass, it's free. There's more information on our website if you want to learn about that. Yes.
The 16th is a Sunday.
Is it? Then our calendar was wrong, or I was wrong. Peter, is that one on the Saturday? So then the 15th. Yes, thank you for that. So yes, the 15th, Saturday the 15th, 1:30 to 3:30 at Fletcher Creek. So if you want more information, again, you can contact Peter, fieldevents@hamiltonnature.org, with any questions, except for what a fen is, that you must find out on your own or wait till the walk. I had to put that in. I love Peter's sense of humor. So yeah, the only fen in Hamilton watershed is going to be sort of the focal point on this walk. So
Our website says it's Sunday the 16th.
it is Sunday the 16th. Oh, geez.
Sunday the 16th, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay.
We're going to keep you on your toes. Well, I appreciate that somebody's paying attention here, so thanks. because it clearly was not me today when I was putting these slides together at work. So more upcoming events, the WELO IBA survey, I mentioned that every month too. It's the second Saturday monthly, so that one just happened this past Saturday, so the next one will be on March 8th. And then we have a few other events coming up too. So a new one is the volunteer orientation. In the next couple slides, I'll talk a little bit more about these. So that's Wednesday, March 19th. And then in April, we've got a couple of our recurring events, not through us, but the Environmentalist of the Year Awards at McMaster, and then Trivia for Nature. So that is, these are the HNC events. So volunteer orientation, that's a new one for us. I'm really excited about it. It's gonna be here on March 19th. I don't wanna guess what day of the week that is, so pull up your calendars. I think it's Wednesday. But that's 7 to 9, and this is a new one. So we're talking about how we need volunteers, but we don't often have the chance to really get down and talk about it after these things. Everybody has places to be, and that's understandable. So this is gonna be a night dedicated just to talking about what we do and how you can get involved in learning more. So 7 to 9, I believe at 7:30, I think we're gonna start with just a brief presentation on the HNC, who we are, what we do, and what sort of opportunities are available to you. And they're vast. There's so much that we do, from on-the-ground support to refreshments to being on the board and behind the scenes. So we're gonna have tables set up with representatives, Falcon Watch even too, so things that you don't necessarily hear about every month up here, there's still lots that's going on behind the scenes. So if you want to learn more about that, talk to some of our other volunteers about their experiences and see how you can get involved and what interests you. It's going to be a really fun night. So really happy that we're putting that on. Thanks to Jen and Charlie for leading the charge on that. And then Trivia for Nature is April 5th. I think that's a Saturday as well. And that's gonna be Park Street West in Dundas. I think that's the church, right? Yeah, the church. So where it always is. So if you've been before, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, every year we host a fundraiser, Trivia for Nature. So it's general trivia, not just nature trivia. $15 a person, cash bar, bring your own snacks, 50-50 raffle. Always a great time, and just a fun way to let loose and get to know each other, not in a formal setting like this. So again, April 5th. And then just backing up a day before that, on the 4th, Friday, again, the Hamilton Environmentalist of the Year Award. I think they didn't have it last year, so bringing it back, and that's at McMaster University. If you want to learn more or buy tickets, eoyawards.com. And the nominations are accepted until February 20th. So I encourage you all to go and nominate your friends, your peers, anybody that's doing great environmental work here in Hamilton and deserves that recognition. So check it out. You can learn more about the awards that are being offered. And yeah, if you've got somebody in mind, that'd be great. Bird study groups, so that typically would be next week, but because it's Family Day, it's gonna be bumped to the 24th this month, Monday, February 24th here at 7:30. So we have Pam McDonald from the Halton Master Gardener. Is that a title, or is that just what Pam is? Okay. Either way, Pam is also a member here at the HNC, and she's going to share with us how urban gardens can be designed to provide habitat for songbirds. So that's going to be a really cool one. She's been doing a lot of great work at Victoria Park and the gardens there. So you'll learn a little bit more about that project and just extra tips too. So again, that's on the 24th, skipping a week for Family Day, and then we'll be back on track next month after that. So again, too, thanks to Rob, we are live streaming now on our YouTube channel, so we're doing that tonight. And if you are watching online and if you have questions throughout, the chat is being monitored. So Rob is checking for your questions, for your comments. After the presentation is done tonight, we have a Q&A session, so feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll get to them as we can. So can't promise every single time this monthly meeting is going to stream, but it is right now, and we'll do our best to give you guys a heads up if we know that's going to be an option. But of course, we love to see you here too, so this is great. And the next monthly meeting is Cultivating a Sense of Wonder. So we have John Hanna coming from Hillfield Strathland College, and yeah, more details to come on that, but that'll be on Monday, March 10th, and really looking forward. So we've got a few more to go before we take our break in the spring, so make sure you get out to that one, because I think there's only April and May after that, is there? Yeah, so just a few left. Going by fast already, geez. I feel like January was like a year, and now we're already halfway through February, but I'm not mad. So about our speaker tonight, without further ado, I'm going to bring Susan up in just a moment, but Susan Dudley is the McMaster Biology Greenhouse Director. She received a bachelor's and a master's in biology at McGill University and a PhD at the University of Chicago, and was a postdoc research associate at Brown University. She joined the biology department at McMaster, as an assistant professor almost 30 years ago, and is now a professor there. So the research from her lab is primarily curiosity-driven evolutionary ecology research on plant kin recognition. Very cool. However, there's also an applied plant ecology research, deer and garlic mustard impacts on seedling trees, ecological restoration in roadsides and salt-impacted areas, and, as we're going to be speaking about tonight, native bee communities. So let's welcome Susan up to the stage for her presentation. And look, we're smooth transition tonight, no technological delays. We're good to go. It's all you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm a plant ecologist, but my lab is full of bees, so full of bees. How did this happen? Who do I blame for this? I blame several graduate students, but especially Sebastian, who started this, and a number of undergraduates. And what I'm going to do today is tell you about stuff that other people have done, especially Sebastian, Noah Stegman, and Isabel Fanaki. So Hamilton is proud of its biodiversity. Like, you know this, you've seen these slides, you've seen this, we're a hot spot. But what about the bees? It's hard to know about the bees. Our plant biodiversity, we can look at causes, we can look at our place near the Carolinian, where the transition between the Carolinian zone and the more northern mixed forest. But why are we, what's happening with the bees? So this first study that I'm going to talk about is looking at, was Sebastian looking at a little prairie remnant that belongs to HCA, and then the McMaster Forest, which many of you may have been to. It's a very nice place to be. Within the McMaster Forest, there's a fair bit of diversity. So Sebastian identified several different habitats. A created prairie at the front, which had just been sown when Sebastian started his thesis. Nearby, what he called the adjacent old field, which is starting to come up in prairie grass. It's pretty cool. There is a wet meadow that has become progressively more dry, and the northern old field, which is a little tiny former potato field surrounded by forest. So if we look at these habitats, they really do differ in their plant composition. So this is a kind of ordination looking at how the plant species are found in these different habitats. And the main thing to notice is that very visual thing, that things of different colors are separate from each other. They're not overlapping. And in particular, the green, the old field north is quite different. The new prairie and the adjacent old field, which are right next to each other, were quite similar at that point. Strangely enough, what was thought to be a prairie remnant, the HCA now called the meadow, least diverse in composition where Sebastian measured the bees. So we see a lot of diversity even among open habitats. But our question is, what about the bees? And here, I'm going to see if we can find out. Just threw that in because it's adorable, and also you see it's interacting with the flower, with this rose flower in cool ways. So what about the bees? Oops. Well, the bees are quite a lot of bees. The bees are quite diverse in size and color and how they interact. You can see you do have a honeybee up here, a nice bumblebee, Nomada, Agrochlorella. So lots of different kinds, different sizes, different habitats. So Ontario as a whole is reported to have about 420 bee species. Over 11 years of bee studies by my lab, the estimates are like 222 species of bee. So more than were found in a few other long-term Ontario studies. So we kind of win that way. You'll notice I'm not saying any exact numbers. Why are there no exact numbers? First off is the time it takes to do bee work. You have to pin them all, then you have to key them out, and then you have to go find an authority who's willing to look at your bees and confirm your identification, and this all takes so much time. And the other problem is the bees themselves. You have to have bee specimens that are dead to do identification. You have to even so a lot of species look alike under the dissecting scope. And especially to genera Nomada, which is a kleptoparasite, it steals other bees' pollen that they put out for their eggs. And Lasioglossum, they have a lot of cryptic species that look alike. So, and the final thing is that we seem to have a very deep community, and that seems to be typical of most bee communities. The more you look, the more you find. So as you increase your sampling, you have this increasing amount of, number of species. So one of the things we thought might happen would be that the prairie-related sites would be the best, and the old field sites, which have a mix of native and non-native stuff, would be not so good. And in fact, this is not what we see. So this is a Venn diagram, but what happens when you do a Venn diagram with 5 different sites? So 43 in the center, 43 species are shared among the 5 sites. And then if we ignore all the inner stuff and just look at the pure colors on the outside, you can see that each of these unique sites, the remnant prairie, the created prairie, the old field adjacent, old field north, and wet meadow, have unique species that they're also bringing into the mix. So this diversity, this mosaic of different habitat types contributes to the diversity of bees that we found. And I want to point out, because we'll kind of come back to this in the talk, that the old field north, which is that site that is surrounded by forest, is the one that brings considerably more unique species than the other ones. And if we look at bee diversity, if we look at the individual species and what do bee people do, they count bees of different species, we find that some species are extremely common and most species are quite rare. And our first graph on the left is showing you this in just basic counts. And you see it pretty much looks like it flattens out very quickly. Our second figure on the right is a log graph to let you see kind of shrink in some of the big variation and expand some of the small stuff. And that very bottom of the graph, so over here, that is the bees where they only found 1 of that species. Or next bar up, only 2 of that species. Or next bar up, only 3 of that species. So there's no really dominant species. There's one species, Osmia conjuncta, which is focus of the third part of the talk, was the most common. A couple other native bees are quite common, and then most species are rare. And that's, again, pretty typical of bee communities. So Noah asked about the landscape, so about bees within the landscape. Sebastian Stuff found hints of landscape influence, wanted to develop this more. He was interested in the causes of pollinator decline from diseases coming from domesticated bees like honeybees and bumblebees that are used for pollination in greenhouses, pesticide use, introduced species, habitat loss, it's always habitat loss, as we know, and climate change. And he points out that most people, when they think about conserving species, are thinking about the meadows, the prairies. Bees are considered animals of open habitats. So you might have a pollinator garden, we might try to preserve more open areas, but what about the landscape around it? So, probably, yes, the landscape, but we don't know enough. And he did a really interesting thing, which is separate out the male and female bees when he's doing his community work. So the gender matters in bees. They have different diets, so females are looking for pollen because they do a lot of work to provision nest cells for their young. Males are mostly looking for nectar. Females are bigger, they have a bigger energy demand, size dimorphism meaning females are bigger. They emerge at different times of year, they have different lifespans. So male and female bees, not the same, maybe their landscape use is not the same. So this is Noah's map of where he was with tiny little indications on it of where, but essentially down here at the Mac Forest, which you notice it kind of connects through Ancaster Creek up to McMaster itself. So he's looking around Lot M, which is a parking lot. It has a lot of interesting ecology around it, and in particular, it has a couple of forested springs on the hill slopes, so wet areas within the forest. And then he had more up on the border of McMaster and RBG, so in and around the athletic fields. So Noah's going out twice every 2 weeks and collecting bees. He looked at his top 10 bees and asked, well, how are they using the landscape? So we've got, I want to wander, but I'm not mic'd in. We've got 5 different landscapes here. So we're looking at the field open areas, we're looking at the forest edge, the forest itself, the forested springs, which were only found around Lot M, and wetlands. So we had replicate sites. And we're going to look at 10 different bees. On the bottom, we have honeybees, non-native, livestock, competing with the native bees. There are opinions. We have opinions about honeybees in my lab. So you notice they're always there from the very start of the season. It's all females that he catches, and they are mostly found in the open or forest edge adjacent to open, wetland, open areas. If we look at the Serratina, in this figure, blue is male, yellow is female, green is total. We can kind of ignore the total. And what we're seeing here is kind of some interesting gender differences. We see that they're found, well, first off, we see bees, Serratina, in the forest edge, and the wetland. But in the field, we only see females. In the forest edge, then we see males and minor use in the wetland. If we look at Halictus confusus, very confusing genre, we see females in the field, females in the forest edge, females in the wetland, and males in the forested spring. So, completely different use by the sexes of the habitats. For Halictus ligatus, we're seeing females coming out earlier than males, not uncommon. And they are mostly field and a little bit forest edge. Algochlorella aurata, really nice, racing herb green bee. We're seeing mostly females in the field, and females with a tiny little bump of males on the forest edge, but we expect in a solitary bee to find equal numbers of male and female. Fisher's sex ratio theory tells us that should happen, and we're not seeing it here. Algochlorella pura is more of a forest specialist. We see both males and females in the forest, but they are present at different times. Yes, I have more bees. So, we're seeing with the Serratina calcarata that there's a big blip of males in the field. Later in the summer, females in the forest edge earlier in the summer. So very, they're again using different areas but adjacent to each other. Serratina dupla, a little bit more males are early, females are late, and the forest edge is mostly male. But they do both appear in wetlands and field. And they're pretty similar looking bees, and so you see this among species variation and how they're using habitats, seeing that most species are found in multiple habitats. A couple more. An agapostemon here. We've got a blip for females and then one for males, just using the field. Serratina micmaci, field and wetland primarily, with again a blip for males early on, but only in the field. The females are present in the wetland, and we see 3 peaks of activity. So he has a very dynamic view now of one species found in areas that are, as the bee flies, doable, and kind of concentrating in one area or another at different times of the year. Why they're doing it, how they're doing it, whether it involves a second hatching where we see 2 peaks, or we're seeing movement in the landscape, we don't know. But if we kind of sum this up, we've got 8 of 10 species using multiple habitats, so not just the field. 8 of 10 species, not the same 8, show different timing for males and females, which is kind of expected, but 4 of 10 species are actually have males and females during the sampling using different habitats and not kind of co-occurring at the same time in the same place, which, if you think of the role of male bees as mostly providing sperm, doesn't really make sense, although what we are looking at here is predominantly the way we catch bees is we put out brightly colored cups that look like super huge flowers, and then the bees come and drown themselves in that. So they're foraging when we catch them. We may not be catching them when they're looking for nest sites. Bees are known to actually use the flowers on the tops of trees early in spring, so people who started sampling up in the canopy find bees in the trees. So lots is not known about what kinds of habitat they need and what kinds of habitat they're using. But this gives us a glimpse into something that's much more complicated than we thought. So this is just 10 species because they were the 10 species where there was enough bees and where Noah was confident that he could ID them, two species. Other bees were ID'd to genus, and he's working on the continued identification. So the pattern has the consequence of becoming more complex. So now what I want to talk to you about is the snail shell nesting bee, Osmia conjuncta. And it is a native bee, but it's using a non-native snail as a source of nesting substrate. So this is primarily a project that was done by Isabel Finacki for her undergraduate thesis at the start of the pandemic. So she's kind of out isolated on her own, wandering through the open prairie, the front of the Mac forest, collecting snail shells for much of the fall. And this is a very pretty bee with its kind of blue body color and its kind of buff hairiness on it. And it is, as far as we can tell, obligately nesting in snail shells. Bees, mason bees, nest in a lot of different things, stems, holes in the ground. There are snail shell nesting bees that just use snail shells. They're really well known in Europe and Africa. There are many different species. There's lots of empty snail shells around. These are, I should say, when they're using snail shells, the shells are empty. You know, they're not actually, you know, smallish bee, big snail. There's no kind of, you know, killing of the snail or coexistence or anything involved. So they're going into the empty snails and using them as a handy hole in which to lay eggs. And in our field, what we ended up finding out is there were a lot of, well, we noticed when we came there were a lot of snail shells everywhere. It'd be like what people would say when they were walking around and hit the bare ground is, I've never seen that many snail shells. Apparently you would if you were in Europe, judging by some of the papers I've read. But these are a European snail, and they are sometimes in high abundance in places, and they can have like explosions and collapses of populations. They move very slowly. They were introduced, it says here, by colonialism. Few times they look pretty, accidental transport because they're on plants. W.G. Binney decided to move them and see what happened and how fast they move. So he is a vector of dispersal. And so the question Isabel was asking was, what's, you know, well, I mean, we were curious about grove snail abundance and whether it explained that huge number of osmia that Sebastian was finding. As my field course, when they opened a few snail shells, they would find cocoons. So this is a pupa here that was found inside an osmia cocoon. If you think about the life of the bee, it's like lays an egg, the egg hatches out, matures, pupates, goes into diapause, into dormancy as an adult, and overwinters inside the shell as an adult. Then it emerges in spring, males first, then females, and the females will start putting nest cells in snail shells. The males kind of, you know, are no longer present after spring, but there's a low number of females present for a while. But all the mason bees are kind of done by the mid to end summer. They're not fall bees at all. So much of their lifespan is spent inside this snail shell. So the choice of snail shell, that's an important one. And after a while, as we worked on this is not chronological, but we started asking, well, how rare are Osmia conjuncta? So in my sole piece of original research that I'm contributing to the bee work, did a literature survey and found as many community studies as I could in eastern North America, which is where Osmia conjuncta is reported to be native. And I looked at, well, what's the percent of the community? If we look at numbers of Osmia conjuncta as a percent of total community number, how much do we see? So this graph mostly shows you, first off, that we're seeing a lot of black spots with no osmia and a lot of smaller yellow spots with osmia. Across eastern North America, they are not in Thunder Bay or Alberta, but they are in Quebec, for example, not really in Maine or the Maritimes, often but they go down as south as Georgia. If we look at numbers, though, and look at percents, so we have here our literature survey averaging 0.1%. That's not a lot. So they're mostly a very small component of communities. It had been reported, and this is work we've built off of by Miriam Richards, who is a professor at Brock and has been studying communities around St. Catharines for years, that in Niagara region, pretty high numbers of autism conjuncta. So she averaged 16%, and we only know the total number from her study. And this is Sebastian's work, so as high as 60%, as low as nearly absent. So a fair bit of variation across these communities, but we see on average about the same that Miriam Richards found. And Miriam Richards also found, Sebastian said, look, she said she found, grow snails, the Panemorales, in her site. So they opened a few shells, but they didn't find any. We should do that, so we did. And that is how this started. So Isabel was asking, how do osmia females use the shells as a resource? How do they interact with them? What can we deduce about it? And what we have is we have shells, we have presence or absence of cocoons in them. So she went out, set up a lovely experiment with 99 quadrats, collected over 1,080 shells from October through December, and then brought them back to the kind of nearly abandoned biology building and started opening them. So my big role in this, it being the pandemic and me being worried about teaching online more than being out with my students, who were supposed to be working alone anyway, was like texting, making sure everybody had, was alive every hour. And she recorded things about the shells, broke them open, counted the presence of cocoons, noticed a lot of other things that my current student, Mimi Guerres, is now actually quantifying. There are cute little salticid spiders inside the shells. There are ant mimic spiders inside the shells. A lot of webbing. Some other organisms. Sometimes you see pupae that appear to have been preyed upon. So she measured primarily shell size, shell color, and shell condition, signs of breakage. And here's our counts. These are counts per meter squared. So most quadrats had no shells. But one quadrat had 87 shells, that one. And on average, we had 10 shells per quadrat. And that's pretty consistent. Her quadrats are every 10 meters. Even if we put them right next to each other, we can go from 0 to 20 to, it's very sporadic, the shell presence. And we did find some predictive things. We found there were more of them in the north. We found there were more where there were shrubs, go figure, and plant cover. So Isabel kindly marked that these shells are not to scale. So shells in low cover, it's also easier to find them in low cover, but spending time to hunt through the full thing near shrubs and more northern in the prairie. So shell condition is kind of a cool thing because it may be evidence of predation. So in Europe, there are thrushes that have anvils, and they grab snails and they whack them on the anvils. The anvils are rocks, but tool-using thrushes. And so there you see damage on the top if it's birds. On the other hand, rodents, they tend to damage around the aperture, which is this mouth of the snail, you know, where the head comes out, the mouth of the shell, if you will. So if they're attacking, you know, going after the snail, they're attacking there. You notice that the broken shells tend to be smaller. Certainly the broken shells are more fragile. Certainly people do wander through the field, but mostly people stay on paths. And unbroken shells tend to be larger. We did not find any other kinds of snails that we could identify as being different from a grove snail in this. So about 10% of the snail shells has pupa, which is actually quite a bit, given the number, if you think of 10 shells per square meter, and that's a 4-hectare prairie, and there's still some in the old field. So most shells only had like 1 pupa, but a hive of 6. This is different from Europe. In Europe, the snail shells often are packed full of pupae of different species. And this is basically showing that they had a pretty clear size preference. Not too big, not too small. That's all 0 here, this band. And where you find pupae, where you find cocoons, it is in that intermediate range. Roughly, they like kind of 14 to 18 millimeters in height. They also had color preference. So the shells fade over time. They're kind of sun-bleached over time. Brand new shells still have the yellow background. They still look like a live snail. And they have very intense dark bands. Mostly we have yellow band, you know, yellowish. There's a lot of color variation. There's a lot of genetic color variation. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm just talking about the sun bleaching. So the yellow dies off quickly, and the bleaching, or the bands will fade over time. A very white shell will be noticeably much more brittle than a new shell. And we see they are avoiding shells that look like live snails. There's a 0 there. And they are mostly avoiding the very white ones. And they really like the light to medium colored shells. So the females are out there making choices. This is not kind of new information. A lot of people play around with setting up nests for bees and putting markers to see if they avoid markers associated with predation, things like that. So females have some memory to keep going back to the same place and provisioning it, and preferences. So big question we were curious about is, what could they have used before Sapea nemeralis was introduced in the 1800s? This is presumably a snail shell nesting bee. Appears to be obligate. It's rare in so many places, but you give it snail shells and it's incredibly abundant. So that kind of tells us that it's an obligate, it needs to have snail shells, was not using Sapea nemeralis as it evolved. So these boxes here are that size range that seems to be used by the bees, and then these dots are a bunch of different native species found in 2 different studies, one in an Illinois prairie, so fairly rare, that's on the left, one in a Tennessee, set of Tennessee forests and open areas, so much more, snails are much more abundant there, and there are more species. So these are macro snails in that range. There are, tiger snails are kind of an obvious, that's Anguispira alternata, I think it is, sort of an obvious candidate for it, but it's rarer now to find snails, and in general, terrestrial snails are declining. So we don't know what would have been around in our habitat for them to be used. There are very few, so how do we know this is a snail shell nesting bee? In North America, all the snail shell nesting bees are, you know, this guy came to me and gave me a bee and said it came out of a snail shell. And in the case of this species, the guy, you know, we have a target snail, one of the tiger snails, but one that is not found locally. So that was in St. Louis. So Angospira kochi has been observed with bees coming out of it, but we don't have that species here. So we don't know what species they're using. We have candidate species is all. So this isn't all we're doing. So I want to say, well, what do we get out of this? Well, we learn the bees probably need access to multiple habitats. If we're going to save the bees, we have to save more than the open areas. They're using the forest, they're using the edge. They're even using wet areas. So the osmia, this is kind of, as a story, it's fascinating. We have lots of little native snails because of these native bees, because we have these invasive snails. But if you have 60% of the community is osmia conjuncta, what's happening to the rest, you know, to the rest of the bees? And we conjecture that they are being competed with and crowded out. So, especially in spring, when the males come out, they may, in fact, suppress other bees. So we see a lot of bee species in our northern oldfield, but that's also the only place we don't see osmia conjuncta. So it may be that no grove snails, no osmia conjuncta, and we can have more bees present in the native oldfield. But the northern oldfield is also surrounded by old growth forest, and there's lots of really cool spring ephemerals right next door. So we may be seeing more diversity because of that, because there are bees using the forest and coming into the open. So I've got a student who's studying bee behavior in the snail shell system. I've got a student who's looking at bee hotels. Are bee hotels a good idea? What do you find in them? Do they use markers? Do they care about the size of the tubes you put in? Future research, maybe bees in the trees and the shrubs would be a good thing to do. Maybe more look for the native snails that are potential sources of shells for these guys. So yes, I started this by blaming Sebastian and all those students who come to my lab, but I actually accept them and give them cool projects to do. So, and am part of the bee city, or the bee campus move, and helped get sustainability, get a nice bee garden going. So I am a collaborator in this whole bee madness. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to take questions.
So your students, they just come to you because you're the bee expert, or is there just more interest in bees than in other insects?
I think they come to me because they heard my lab does bees, and then I have to say, I can't ID bees, I don't know bees. You have to learn how from the graduate students, and they still stay. So, I mean, it is, a lot of this is knowledge being passed along by the mentoring graduate students. But it takes time to learn to identify bees, and that's like the worst of the work, is how much time it takes to identify your bees. Easy to identify the genus, very hard to identify the species. Oh, yeah.
Just wondering if you get stung very often, and if it usually a particular type of bee is sting.
So mostly, I'll say, all the bee stinging that happens associated with the lab has been, I put my hand down and there was a ground nesting bee nest or ground nesting wasp nest right there. And that includes like the bee researchers who've mostly never been stung, and my taking, 14 years of running a autumn field course. Because we get them when they're, like, you put out the pans, they come and conveniently drown themselves in the pans, and then they don't sting you anyway. But mostly, I mean, honeybees, social wasps, they defend because there's a big resource, like a lot of young there to defend. But if you think of an osmia, like orchard bees might lay 30, 40 eggs in their lifetime, and if they're putting 1 to 2 in each snail shell, like why stay and defend that snail shell when you can just go on and invest in other ones, you know? And even though I'm a parent, I'm gonna say, you know, like it isn't, like motherhood in nature is not kind of hallmark stuff. There's a lot of, I don't know, it's a trade-offs involved, and yeah, so they're better off to go and lay more eggs, not to defend one particular one.
So these are all solitary bees, sorry.
Do the different species mate, intermingle?
So we have like maybe 200 species to our knowledge. There isn't hybridization among them. Often animals have kind of specific mating cues, rituals, you know, ways that the males and females differ. So to our knowledge, no. I don't know if bees have the kind of hybrid swarms that plants do, but plants can intermate really readily. More expertise in that. You had a question.
So I was just wondering if these are all solitary bees?
So honeybees are the most social of bees. But there are, bumblebees are social. We occasionally catch bumblebees. They're mostly too big and they escape the traps pretty readily, so there are more bumblebees around than we catch. And there are other kinds of social or colonial bees, you know, like the cellophane bees that nest together, but they're not really, you know, social in the way the bumblebees are with defined roles. So mostly solitary, but there is variation. Most people I talk to think bees are honeybees, and that's the only bees, and there's just amazing variation out there. Solitary bees, mostly not so aggressive, but, you know, there's enough social things out there that we're cautious.
Question about the growth snails that are in there. They are incredibly abundant in that restored area, and is there a particular reason for that? And part two, is that population, now that the yellow savanna grass is really dominating there, is the population increasing?
No, I had a couple of students out there, not last summer, but the summer before, and you have to work a lot harder, but you can still find shells and live snails, unfortunately, in and amongst the yellow savanna grass, as well as in the old field to the north. So it's really easy to see them in the areas where there's a lot of bare ground, but they're still present in other areas. They were there before we did any restoration. I mean, that's one of my first summer walks out was like, what is happening here? You know, I have not seen this kind of variation. So the literature isn't really helpful in why sometimes you see these kind of amazing booms. So I'm talking about like 10 per square meter of growth snails on average, but there are places that would have like as many as 100 per square meter further south in like New Jersey or something like that. And sometimes then the population would crash. There's a population in London that's been kind of studied at intervals, or several populations, and they do seem to remain fairly constant there. But even in Europe, you see like clumps and then open areas. They don't like conifers, they don't like woods. So disturbed areas seem to be a preferred place. Where they're conserving native snails, they notice the grove snails around the parking lots, for example.
So I may have missed this.
I may have missed this, but are you finding that the location you find a snail shell affects the occupancy rate at all, or is it based mostly on color, like if you find them in like the shade or out in the sun?
Okay, yeah, I skipped over that part, but it's actually really cool because the snails are more likely to be found near shrubs, but the bees tend to avoid the shrubs. So there are fewer cocoons in bee shells near shrubs. So there is some, it follows in part the number of shells, but not entirely. It follows other things as well about the environment.
So I've got a quick question. I've been advised that bee hotels are actually bad, that you don't want to have them because you can get fungus and you can wipe out an entire root. So my question to you is, because I'm planning on it, I'm searching for new property
Mm-hmm.
and think of it as a blank slate. What do you advise that, besides the flowers, what other types of things should I have there for the bees? I
Oh.
believe fallen logs, any types of tips would be helpful.
Yeah, so the more nature, the better. So, I mean, leaving plant debris, having piles of mulch, things like that, where there might be open stems, picking, I mean, there are certain, things like raspberry canes, some other plants that often have open stems, those are good places. When we created the bee nesting garden at MAC, because we were kind of trying to promote more conservation than just putting up bee hotels, which is what Facility Services did. We have a couple of different substrate types, some bees like sand, some bees like more clay soil. So we've got a clay, a sand, and a triple mix. Native plants present. But especially, and this is hard because grounds there is inertia, and we've always done it this way, and it works, and they don't want to see things untidy, but you need someone to give habitat. I mean, apparently setting up bumblebee boxes is actually the worst, because you could be perfect and they'll just ignore it. But you do see the females running, flying around in spring looking for places to nest.
So just a quick question back to the bee hotels. Do you recommend getting paper straws to insert and replace those yearly?
Yeah, so it's like, this is what we're trying to find out, and it sort of, as a failed experiment, they may like the bamboo better, or they may just be because the bamboo got left there 2 years, and so we picked up more. But yes, supposedly, if you clean out, and we haven't in fact seen, like we've looked for the mites, we don't see the mites on our bees that people often report in bee hotels, but what we do see is not really any native bees in the first batch. So first native wasps, and Noah Stegman, pro wasp, will tell you wasps have a bad rap like moths do compared to butterflies, but they are really important ecologically. But most of the bees there were things like orchard bees that are introduced, and so we don't want to be favoring non-native bees. On the other hand, my student Naira, who's working on the bee hotels and put out all new straws, found a couple of straws where there is clearly bees bringing resin, pine resin, to the straws, and that's apparently really common, but it's the first time we've observed it. So that implies we have a native bee using it. But you can tell the wasps because they're busy provisioning their straws with lots of spiders.
Just as I think I've done, and you can tell me whether this is good or not, when clearing out the previous years, like plant matter, like the stems and stuff like that, I've just taken them and kind of set them aside and hid them in like a fence or somewhere it's kind of out of sight, but they're still there for the bees to find and all that. I love that. It'd be helpful for those who want to have the illusion of being clean, but
Yeah.
still keeping your plant matter around.
Yes, so I mean, a couple things you could do. You can, clip stuff and put it to the side to provide nesting habitat. If you have like stems present, you can wait for a week after it warms up to let the bees inside come out before you clip them back, so you're not out the very first warm day, but give it a week or so to settle in. So, I think like a compromise of it looks nice enough, but it still has a lot of natural areas is better. So I keep asking my bee people if bees need water, and maybe honeybees need water, but they keep telling me that no, most native bees don't need a water source. Okay.
I've had bee houses for about 5 years, and I started off doing all the wrong things because it came from Home Depot. It was terrible. But then I actually took some time to do some research. So just answering the lady's question over there about the tubes, I ordered a whole ton of different kinds of tubes, different sites that I found to try to see which ones worked. And there was one particular brand called Local, which is from Vancouver. For leaf cutter bees, they need to be 6 millimeters wide, and for mason bees, they prefer 8 millimeters wide of the tubes. So I tried a whole bunch of different ones, and these one particular brand worked. So I wrote to them and said, hey, just to let you know, you're using them from bee. They're cool. So they actually do a bee line now. So if you go into locals, you'll see a little blurb about, our friends have told us these work. So you could buy those, but the important thing that you mentioned is that if we use the tubes, they will get mites and pathogens and all kinds of critters that you don't want in there. So the best thing to do, which takes all winter, I'm not done yet, is you open up all of those tubes every winter, take out the cocoons, wash them just in water, and then you put them in your garage, let them stay cold, and then put them out in the spring, and they will hatch, emerge from there. So it's a good process, it's a fun thing to do, but I think the real responsible way to do it is to actually open up those tubes, get the cocoons out, wash them, and then throw those tubes in the garbage and never use them again. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, yeah, I am with the, you use the tubes for 1 year. We're not seeing, I mean, mind you, we're kind of opening up midwinter because that's the university season, but we're not seeing the kind of pest infestation that other people have found and reported. I also bought from Blowholes, although they don't deliberately sell the 6 millimeter as, so I think I got them as cocktail straws instead of bee straws, but it does seem to, I was looking for a Canadian source, and there they were. Yeah, the bees did seem to like bamboo, but it is also more painful and, I mean, for science, more irregular, and we wanted regular for science reasons. So we have also tried an experiment, and I'll be able to tell you in a few months if they prefer you to put little markers on your tube. So we had, Naira had nail polished the ends of 6 or 8 of the tubes in different colors of blue and green and yellow. And this is supposed to help the females who are coming back and provisioning to find the right tube again.
Can I just ask, I noticed with my bees that they do search around for the different tubes, and when I'm opening up those tubes, sometimes they'll be like
6 cocoons of a leaf cutter bee, and then there'll be a resin bee. So they do mix up and get lost. Which tube? I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, and some will plug the tubes. I mean, one of the puzzling things about the osmia, most snail shell nesting bees do end up putting some kind of plug at the end, but we're not seeing any evidence of it. So, or at least irregular evidence that they're making plugs. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I was just struck, you had those 5 habitat types.
Mhm.
There's wetlands and open areas, a forested area.
Well, it's an open area surrounded by forest. So an old
Yeah.
field, a mix of native and non-native vegetation, heavy on the goldenrod. That one also has lots of monarda.
Yeah. So I was just struck by the diversity, you know, the male, female, the different types of bees using different areas. And is there any, you know, you think of birds, they use the forest, there's interior birds, there's birds more on the edge. Seems more straightforward. Probably isn't if you spend more time on it.
Well, no, but they're going places. Most of these birds are migratory and
Yeah.
maybe going to quite different habitats further south and different amounts of further south. I mean, the fact that bees are never, you know, like they're mostly not nesting as a male-female pair is also going to contribute to this. But yeah, it is a surprising amount of flux in the populations. And I am kind of more towards the theory that a species groups, you know, they're moving around and tending towards different areas than that there's a population in the forest that only comes out in midsummer, but there's one in the field that comes out in spring for this species. It seems more likely that it is the same bees using different habitats, but we don't have proof of that.
Because I think we tend to want to manage areas and you know, succession being what it is to a forested habitat. But this just shows the incredible importance of the old fields and, you know, the different variations. I imagine the old fields, how old are they? You know, and they'd be very different too, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, old field is actually an ecological term, but these were, so they're what happens to farmed land that's allowed to go fallow. And I've heard that this went fallow in the 60s when it was sold to McMaster for $1 for each chunk of property. So, but, you know, unusually they've stayed old fields, so they haven't really been invaded by other things. But yeah, I mean, bees are reported as mostly open area. This suggests people go to the open area, they find bees, and so that works, right? Until you start going other places. You have to look. And that was, I think, Noah's real strength, as he started looking and collecting amazing numbers of bees, but looking at these different habitats and, in fact, replicating different habitats.
Thank you so much for a wonderful, informative talk.
Thank you.
It's lovely to see how research is done, as opposed to reading it distilled by an author who's trying to reach the layperson. I'm a layperson, but also a lazy person. I'm trying to naturalize my garden as much as I can, and I don't have the patience to eat hotels, but I do have a lot of native plants. And we also give away native plant seeds as you saw in the law, perhaps.
I didn't get a chance to go look, I hope to.
We will be there afterwards for the doctor. What would you say, when we have things there, I really want to talk to you. What would you say are the most important plans and actions that the lay gardener, and maybe it's not even a good gardener, ought to do?
Some of them are the things that we do kind of naturally. We put out plants that bloom across the seasons. I mean, if we're asking why these bees are moving, they may in part be moving to follow the pollen sources, pollen and nectar sources. There are some plants that are known to be like really attractive to bees. Mountain mint has that reputation. Certainly you see a lot around monarda. So having that, picking out a few plants that are super producers, goldenrods, People, goldenrods get a bad rap, especially in the city, and the city might come and visit you because of them, but bees really like goldenrods. They are, again, a good source, or open, a lot of these native asters. Why we're still trying to figure out, well, who's coming to all these unique, very speciose little asters that bloom, and goldenrods that bloom in the fall. Bee people tend to be summer people and spring people, but there's a whole, so Nicole was out at the same time as Isabel was collecting bees in the field up to the end of November. So keeping.
Riddell's goldenrod, the last goldenrod, they're short and sweet, but I never see bees in
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you go out looking for bees on flowers, you tend to catch bumblebees, and that's because we see them. But a lot of bees are really small and kind of fly-looking and cryptic, and there are a lot of interesting flies that pollinate as well. The flower flies are great, and we have a nice diversity of them. Yeah.
What about honeybees? Are they the bad guys?
Yes. Honeybees are the bad guys. Take-home message. Like a hive needs an amazing amount of nectar. Like they might need to visit 20,000 flowers, which if you are in a field of canola, yes, there are 20,000 flowers there that the native bees might not be competing with. But if you are in, like when people bring in honeybees, native bee diversity drops. And that's not surprising. I mean, they also have an advantage. I mean, if, it's spring, the beekeeper is there giving sugar water to the hive, so they get that early start. And are honeybees really the great pollinators that they're supposed to be? Some people are dubious. So my little bee movie that you saw there, you notice it made a different noise, and it was very noisy when it started hitting the actual pollen, the stamens of the rose plant. So certainly bumblebees, they do something called buzz pollination, where they hang to a flower and buzz on it until pollen falls on them. So different mechanisms of pollination. People have shown greater success if there are native bees present on crop pollination. So I would say, sure, in farms, honeybees, I mean, that's where livestock belongs, on the farms, not in your forests. You don't want pigs running around your forest eating the plants either. But we have this diverse bee fauna here in our natural areas. We should keep it. We have a lot of interesting gardens. We shouldn't be doing it's like, I'm against urban beekeeping for that reason too. These are corridors for bees to move around, so they increase populations. So lovely as honey is, the social hives just outcompete other bees, and we see lower diversity where they. So McMaster recently moved out some hives that were put there by an urban beekeeper. We're going to see if we see changes in the bees that we find there.
Thanks so much, Susan. I think we're going to wrap it up here, just given the time. But thank you again for sharing that with us tonight. It was really informative. Appreciate it. I'm going to give you guys the next 10 minutes or so back to sort of mingle on your way out. Go talk to Sheila. Thank you.